morning. So here we are. We're going to do your next lesson in history, and we're going to review. Civil War is what we've been talking about. We've talked a lot about the Civil War, and I hope you enjoyed the video that talked about the differences between hospitals during the Civil War time and hospitals nowadays. The one that shocked me the most was the fact that the doctors didn't even wash their hands between patients. They just went from one to another to another. So I know a bunch of you said comments like, a big room and stuff like that. So thank you for your comments. If you didn't watch the video like you were supposed to, you need to do that. Please remember you lose 20 points for every day you're late. So please do that and make your comments in the school section, the classroom under that lesson, okay? All right, so Civil War. Do you guys remember when it began? Okay, it began in 1861. Remember President Lincoln? When he was president, he was only elected by the northern part of the nation. The southern states got very scared that he was going to take away their slaves, and so they started seceding. The Union Army still had troops at Fort Sumter, and they were running out of food, so they asked to have food. He talked to Jefferson Davis. Jefferson Davis said absolutely not. He sent the ship anyway to resupply his soldiers, and they fired on Fort Sumter. That's the beginning of the Civil War in April of 1861. Okay, remember they thought the war was going to be over really quickly, and it lasted for 4 years. It does not end until April of 1865. So we have two groups of people that are fighting in the Civil War. Remember we talked about a civil war is when you have a nation fighting against itself. Remember that? Okay. So the Union Army. Do you remember some of the other names for the Union Army? So we have Yankee. We have the North. We have the Federals. Oops. Okay, those are some of the additional names for the Union Army, right? Then we have the Confederacy, and remember some of their nicknames? So they are the South. They're also Rebels. They're also Johnny Reb. The Rebs. Oh, you're right. I forgot blue and the gray. Okay. So do you remember the other group of states? So most of the Union was free states in the North, most of the South, all the South were slave states in the South. But do you remember there was a group of states that had slaves but stayed with the Union? Do you remember what they were called? Border states. That is right. They were called border states. Terrible handwriting Mrs. Johnson has today. And the border states, do you remember what they were? Missouri, Kentucky, Maryland, and Delaware. Okay? And remember we talked about how the Civil War still has changed our nation today. Okay? All right, so we're going to do a little review. Are you ready? Who is this? Very good. Abraham Lincoln. He was the president of the Union, right? Okay. And let's see. It's very exciting. Who is this? Now, I know the picture's a little different than the one in the school, but you should be able to tell by his face. He is Sherman, yes? William Tecumseh Sherman. And he was also a general in the Union Army. Remember, he marched to the sea, from Atlanta to the sea, in an effort to divide the South so that the Union Army would win the war and the war would finally be over. Okay, remember that? What about him? Again, his picture's a little different than the one at school as well. And that is Jefferson Davis. Jefferson Davis was the president of the Confederacy. Remember? The Confederate States of America, which we didn't write that on there, but it was. The Confederate States of America had their capital in Richmond, Virginia. Remember? Okay. All right. Who is he? Yes, George McClellan, the little baby that would not fight. You are right. Yes, he was very scared that his military would get hurt. And he let some of the generals we'll talk about over here escape, didn't he? Okay, who is this? Very good. This is Thomas Jackson. Remember, he got his nickname during the Civil War? What was it? Stonewall. Very good. And he was called Stonewall because when he was fighting a battle, another general said, look at his army. He is standing with them like a stone wall. So after that, he was called Stonewall Jackson. Thomas Jackson. All right. How about him? Remember the sideburns? Very good. Ambrose Burnside. Okay. He was a Union soldier, general, yeah, in the Army. Okay, what about him? Very good. Robert E. Lee, also a general in the Confederacy. Remember, Abraham Lincoln asked him to run the Union Army, but remember what he said? He said he had to stay loyal to his state. So when Virginia seceded, so did Robert E. Lee. Okay, very smart man. What about this guy? You are right, that's Jeb Stuart. He is also with the Confederacy. Very good. Remember, he was at Gettysburg with Longstreet. Yeah. And, oh, sorry. That he wasn't there. With, I can't remember his name. Oh my word, it fell out of my head. You know that happens to me sometimes. Robert E. Lee. Here's Longstreet. See, I was ahead of you. Sorry about that. Okay, Longstreet was at Gettysburg. Yes. With Jeb Stuart and Robert E. Lee. Okay, and they're all Confederate soldiers, right? Oh, look. Winfield Scott. Very good. He came up with the Anaconda Plan. Remember we talked about it? It was to divide the South by blockading it to make it so supplies couldn't come in and they couldn't send things out. Remember, they sent a lot of cotton to England, and that's where they made their money. And so he wanted to blockade it so that they would squeeze the South. Remember, anaconda is a kind of snake that squeezes their prey, right? But what did they tell him? That the war wasn't going to last long enough. They wouldn't need that. Okay, remember? He was the first general of the Union Army. Okay, and there he is. Who's that? Very good, Ulysses S. Grant. Remember, he gets his nickname, Unconditional Surrender Grant, when he has surrounded and laid siege to a city, and the general of the Confederacy says, hey, what's your conditions of surrender? And Grant said, unconditional. And he got the Unconditional Surrender Grant. He was also called U.S. Grant, United States Grant for a while. He became president, remember? Okay. Feel like I'm missing somebody. Okay, so I found this picture. I thought you might like it. This is Abraham Lincoln without his beard. Okay, so I thought that was kind of a fun picture to find because we don't often see him without his beard. All right, remember we talked about the Civil War. He doesn't want to stay. The Civil War was full of many battles, right? Every war is full of battles. The battles is what makes up the war, okay? So we talked about there was really no reason for the South to secede because Abraham Lincoln never said that he was going to stop slavery. He just didn't want it to spread anymore. All right, so today in your book, we are looking at the advantages and disadvantages of both sides. Okay? Remember, the Union Army had the advantages of the factories. Remember, we talked about this. So they were able to make everything they needed, weapons and clothes and boots, right? And they had the railroads to move the stuff around. But they weren't fighting on their own land. That was an advantage the Confederacy had. Okay? They are fighting at home. They don't have to go anywhere. So they don't need to send their supplies off because basically they're there. And they don't need to carry as many because basically they're at home. Like you guys are at home now, right? So you don't need to be hauling a lot of groceries around because you don't have anywhere to go. You're not bringing your lunch to school anymore. You're not bringing your water bottle. You don't have to remember your binder and all that stuff. So you don't have to bring as many things with you anymore because you're at home. It's the same kind of idea. They're at home, so they don't have to bring everything they need because they have it there. Whereas the North, they have to send everything they need and they have to send it far away because they're fighting in the South. Remember, the only battle that happened in the North was at Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, right? So remember we talked about how all the battles have two names, which is going to become important by Friday. We'll talk about some of the battles and the two names that they had, how long they lasted, and those kinds of things. Okay? So, let me see. So the other big advantage that the Confederacy had was they had really, really good generals. Okay? So their generals were the best of the generals because they had been in more wars, right? They had been, remember, he was in the Mexican-American War. Remember, he took Santa Anna, went up on the hill with all the thistles and stuff and prickers and things that nobody thought he could get up, and he got up and he took over. He took over Mexico City, yes, from Santa Anna. So that was a big thing. And a lot of them fought in the West, okay? So they had a lot of generals that had fighting experience. Remember we talked about Ulysses S. Grant also was in the West fighting, and so he had a lot of experience too. Okay? All right. So if you look on page 245 of your book, it talks more about the advantages and disadvantages of the South and the North. Remember, taking everything with them. Okay? If you turn the page to 248, you can see the chart right there that talks about the differences between the United States. Remember, when they say the United States of America, they're talking about the Union, and the Confederate States of America is the Confederacy. Okay? So keep that in mind as you look at that chart that tells you a lot of the things I've already said. Okay? All right. So we talked about Robert E. Lee. We talked about how he felt about slavery. He thought slavery was wrong, but again chose to fight with the Confederacy because he was loyal to Virginia. Remember, we talked about how this is important that we study history because now they're tearing down all of his statues because they say, ooh, he was a bad, evil guy. He liked slavery. And remember how we talked about Stonewall Jackson was a Christian who also did not agree with slavery, but was loyal to his state as well. And so he fought for the Confederacy because Virginia seceded. Okay? Remember, we also talked about how all of these men knew each other. Yeah? They all went to the same school, West Point. Remember? They were all trained. They were friends. They were buddies. It wasn't like they were enemies or anything, but they did fight a 4-year battle with each other. Okay, we talked about the blockade. If you look on page 248, you can see all the little ships, which shows what the blockade would look like if they had followed Scott's plan. Remember, eventually they do follow Winfield Scott's plan as the war drags on because they know they have to end it. It just goes on too long. And I think that covers everything for today. Okay. All right. So please do your reading, which is going to be from page 245 to page 248. And then do your workbook pages. And next time we're going to talk about the Battle of Bull Run. Okay. And I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.